This is John Black, Super Chemist, JBSC. Here again, part 3. Now we're going to start about the toxicity of carbon dioxide. I'm going to go over this real quick because it's almost ludicrous that I have to go over this. Like I said, pollution today has nothing to do with actual pollution. They only care about CO2. They don't care about no other pollution. Now this is the atmosphere. It's 80% almost nitrogen, 20% oxygen, 0.04% carbon dioxide. That's 400 parts per million. That means out of every million air particles, 400 of them will be carbon dioxide. The rest is something else. Okay? Now 50% of your life, you have between 35,000 to 50,000 parts per million in your lungs compared to 400 that's in the air. Okay? And why is that? Because you breathe in, right? And then you suck out all the oxygen and then you have a whole bunch of nitrogen and carbon dioxide. So that makes the percentage in your lungs be a lot. Half of your life, you're inhaling and exhaling. You know what I mean? One or the other. So let's see how toxic carbon dioxide is. Outside air is 400 parts per million. An office building has 1,000 parts per million. A house has 1,500 parts per million. The bedroom, let's say you close your door and you go to sleep. When you wake up in the morning, you'll have 2,000 parts per million instead of 400 parts per million. A submarine has between 5,000 and 7,000 parts per million. Like I said, your lungs at the lowest capacity is like 30,000 parts per million. You always have at least 3% carbon dioxide in your lungs at all times. Let's see here. Now, once you get up to 5% carbon dioxide, okay, that's 50,000 parts per million, not 400, 50,000. Then it still has no effect on human beings. But once it gets greater than 5%, right, now it starts to get slightly toxic. I mean, if you had 5.1% or 5.01% carbon dioxide, you could probably go your whole life and it don't even affect you, you know what I mean? But it does start to get toxic at that point, and that's 50,000, more than 50,000 parts per million. Has to go all the way up to 10% to actually be really, really toxic. I mean, where you're going to die within, minutes or hours. 10%, 100,000 parts per million. Okay? So 400 parts per million that we have now, dumping a little bit more in there ain't going to do nothing. 400 is not close to 50 or 100,000, you know what I mean, parts per million. That's not even close. You would have to not double it, not triple it, not quadruple it. You'd have to have it 125 times to 250 times more than what we have right now in the CO2 in the atmosphere for it to be toxic. Okay? So what's in between 125 and 250? Whatever's in between there, say 170, 180. I'm sorry. 75 parts per million. Let's say 75 parts per million. You know how much more that is? It's like 150 times more than what you need or whatever. Anyways, what else do we got here? Now, this is the part that goes... And here's another thing about CPR, too. When you do CPR, when you're breathing into their lungs, you're giving them 4% CO2. Because remember, your lungs have between 3 and 5%, 3.4, you know what I mean? So it's about 4% on average, and 16% O2. And when you're giving CPR, that means their heart stopped, and they're not breathing. They're dead, body-wise, not brain-wise, but body-wise. So when you're giving them all this CO2, and you're reviving a dead person with 4%, that shows how little toxic it is. It's so untoxic that you can bring a dead person back from life, even at 4% CO2. Okay? But this is the crazy part, okay? This is the really crazy part of things about things. What is the best plant growth for plants? It's between 800 and 1,200 parts per million. 1,200 parts per million would be the best. And that's at 0.12%. Well, what do we have now? We're at 400 parts per million, or 0.04%. Now here's where the crazy part gets, okay? What happens at 200 parts per million because they keep telling us we want to get rid of the CO2. We don't want to make no CO2. What happens if we went down to 200 parts per million? 0.02%. I'll tell you what will happen. Plants start to die, okay? Plants start to die. And you know what eats plants? Animals. And you know what eat animals? Humans. Yeah, so if you get rid of the plants, you get rid of the animals. You get rid of the animals, you get rid of the humans. Now what happens at 150 parts per million, which they keep wanting us to go down in CO2. Down, 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 down. How far do they want us to go down? Because what happens at 150 parts per million? All plants die. Okay? All of them. Okay? I'm sure there's exceptions to the rule. But all the freaking plants die. And that means all of the animals die. And that means all of the humans die. Okay? And they're saying that we want to make less CO2. We don't want to put no CO2, even though we need to triple what the CO2 is in the air for plants. Plants want it to be 1,200 parts per million. We're at 400. Plants want 3 times as much CO2. Plants are literally suffocating because we don't have enough CO2 in the air for them. And what does the climate people tell you to do? Stop making CO2? Why? Why? You know, when I seen that at first, I was like, these pieces of garbage, they want the CO2 to be so low that plants can't grow outside, and they can only be grown in government-owned indoor plant rooms where they can pump CO2 into the room for the crops. But that isn't possible. There's no way that they could change. You know, even if we stopped making CO2 today, 100%, every man died on the planet and woman, and there's no more humans. You still, for the last million years, the CO2 is pretty steady. It's been between 200 and 300 parts per million. You know what I mean? So there's no way that could happen where they would try to lower the CO2 so low that it kills all the plants off, except for the government-grown ones in grow rooms. So I don't know. I have to live on this planet, and this is where my victimology thing comes up. I have to live with people who know, okay, or should know, just by Googling. All this information on this board I Googled in 5 minutes. I mean, obviously it took longer than that, to write it down and blah, blah, blah. But it didn't take long to Google this stuff. All this stuff was easily Googled. But you can see that we're at 400 suffocating our plants that need to be at 1,200. And if we take it down to 200, we'll start killing all the plants off. Literally. And at 150, we'll kill all these plants off. Not just a lot of them or some of them, or you know what I mean? I'm talking every freaking plant. We'll die. And a normal human says, no. A woke person says, no, we can't. We gotta stop putting CO2 in. So does the Christian too, the Republican. They say the same lie. And what is their proof? Their proof is that we got the ice caps are melting, the food, we can't make as much food because of the droughts and the hurricanes and all the tornadoes, all this kind of stuff like that, right? Well, let's look at that proof then, since there's such honest people, okay? But let me say something first before we go on, and I'll show you some charts and stuff. This is actually... Oh, wait. This is how CO2 is, okay? Well, first, let me tell you this. Let me see how much time I got left. Okay. Let me tell you this first. If you take some CO2 and you put it in a bottle, right? Let's say you have two bottles, two clear bottles that are plastic, right? One you put air and you put a cap on it. The other one you put air in it and you put CO2 in it, so that it makes the 1,200. In other words, triple the CO2 in the air in the second bottle, right? So you have air, but the CO2 in it is at 1,200 parts per million, right? And the first bottle is at 400 parts per million, but they're both air, right? You put your cap on it, put them in the sun, and you know what happens at the end of the day? Nothing if you take their temperatures. They both rise in temperature because the sun's shining on the bottle, right? But they're saying, unless you have some really high-tech equipment that you're going to measure like, a thousandth of a degree or something, or a hundredth of a degree or something, they raise up at the same time. There's no difference. No difference. None. No, you can triple the CO2 in that bottle, and it still will heat up the same exact way as it did when it only had a little bit of, 400 parts per million. Now, what happens if you take that same experiment? This time you get one bottle, you put air in it, and in another bottle, you put an air in it, but you have the CO2 at like 10%, okay? 10% instead of 0.04%, right? 10%, 100,000 parts per million instead of 400 parts per million. But that just has air in it. Put the cap on there. Now you got one bottle with air in it, one bottle with air that has 10% CO2 in it. You put them into the sun, right? At the end of the day, you see what the temperature difference is from the morning to the end. You'll see a big, giant difference. That proves something. What I just told you, that these two experiments prove something. The second experiment proves that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and it will collect heat from the sun and heat up the atmosphere. That proves it. That second one where we did 10% CO2, that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt. Okay? But the first experiment where we only tripled it, we only took the 400 parts per million up to 1,200 parts per million of CO2. And I have done this freaking experiment, not the 10% one, but this one right here where you triple the whatever. And guess what happens? Like I said, nothing. It doesn't act like a green gas house because we've only taken it up to 10%. We've only taken it up to 0.12%. That's nothing. See, a greenhouse gas only works if you actually have the greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. And I hate to tell you this, but 0.04 is still zero. See, 0.0 is 0. 0.04 is still 0. And 0.12 is still freaking 0. Okay? When it comes to greenhouse effects, it's not magic. You can't just throw one molecule of CO2 into the atmosphere and it blows the planet away. That isn't the way greenhouse gases work. But you have to actually have some of the gas in the greenhouse thing to have an effect, right? You can't just have 400 CO2 molecules for every million air molecules. That's nothing. Same as this. 1,200 molecules of CO2 is nothing if you have a million other molecules in that atmosphere. Okay? So that proves right there that you can triple the CO2 and it doesn't do anything. Doesn't do anything to the the heating up of the atmosphere. Nothing. It does nothing.